Imagine you wake up one morning and the world just feels completely normal.
Right, just your standard average day.
Yeah, exactly. You go through your usual routine, you brew your coffee, you sit down, and you put on your favorite song.
Oh,
You know
nice.
the one, I mean, the track you've listened to 100 times, the one that always brings you this sense of grounding and comfort.
We all have one of those.
Right. But when you press play, something is just horrifyingly wrong.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The melody is just gone. The underlying harmony has completely vanished.
Wait, what do you hear then?
Instead of music, all you hear is the sound of screeching, grinding metal. Like it just grates against your eardrums, causing this visceral, full-body panic.
Oh, wow.
So you try another song. Same thing, just shards of noise. You realize, in a cold sweat, that you haven't just lost your taste in music.
Right.
You have lost the very capacity to experience harmony. The world has literally become a fundamentally hostile frequency.
It's a terrifying premise, honestly. You're describing a complete breakdown of how a person interfaces with reality.
Exactly. And that exact sensation, that sudden horrifying dissonance where something nourishing turns into something violently abrasive, is what we are exploring today.
But we aren't applying it to music, are we?
No, we are not. We are applying it to the most fundamental requirement of human biology. We are talking about the very concept of nourishment. We are talking about what it means to eat.
And that requires a massive, unsettling paradigm shift for you listening right now, because eating is the baseline human act.
Right.
You have to do it to survive. We build our days, our families, our whole cultures around it.
You really do.
But what happens when that baseline act becomes completely intolerable? What happens when the biological drive to stay alive goes to war with your moral and psychological survival?
That exact friction brings us to our deep dive for today. We have a single, intensely personal, and frankly, deeply unsettling document in front of us.
It really is.
It's titled, How Consumption of Food Became a Death Cult. And I have to warn you, it defies easy categorization.
Yeah, you start reading it thinking it's going to be a standard memoir about an eating disorder.
Right. But by page 3, it morphs into this sweeping sociological critique. And by the end, I mean, it's reading like a medieval theological treatise.
It goes deep.
So our mission today is to explore how the simple act of eating to stay alive can become so violently entangled with guilt, with societal hypocrisy, and, ideological warfare, that a person actively chooses starvation.
And not as a diet.
No,
Yeah.
not as a beauty standard, but as a desperate, radical act of spiritual purity. We are charting a journey from a lost sense of taste to a total alienation for the human body itself.
What's fascinating here is that we cannot look at this text as just like a clinical case study of an isolated individual.
Yeah, that would be missing the point.
Exactly. If you try to box this into the DSM-5 under a standard eating disorder, you miss the entire point of the author's argument. This document is a symptom of a much broader, much deeper cultural malaise.
It's like they're a tuning fork or something.
Yes, the author acts as a hypersensitive cultural tuning fork. They connect dots that most of us are too busy or maybe too frightened to connect.
Well, they draw a straight, undeniable line between modern eating disorders, the $1.8 billion corporate marketing machinery,
Which is staggering.
the pornography industry, and the historical religious asceticism of the Middle Ages. I mean, it is a text that forces you to look at your own daily habits, your own pantry, your search history, and question the very water you're swimming in.
It is an incredibly raw look at modern life.
It really is. The author feels like a canary in a coal mine, taking every toxic aspect of our culture, every manipulative advertisement, every piece of political guilt-tripping, every hidden cruelty in our supply chains, and metabolizing it physically in their gut.
It's hard to read, but you just can't look away.
No, you can't. But obviously, a person doesn't just wake up one day with this extreme militant worldview.
Right, it doesn't happen overnight.
There is a progression. So I want to take us right to the inciting incident. The exact moment the canary stopped singing. The day this author's food literally tasted like ash.
Yeah, the author describes this defining, completely destabilizing moment. They are sitting down at the table to eat a simple bowl of family stew.
Just a normal meal.
Exactly. It's a meal they've had 100 times. It's deeply tied to childhood comfort. They lift the spoon to their lips, anticipating that familiar warmth, and suddenly, the food tastes of ash and dust.
Just Ash?
All the flavor, all the nutritional promise has been burned away. It is as if they are chewing on dry soil.
That is wild.
And what's crucial to understand for our analysis is that this isn't a medical anomaly. They didn't catch a virus that wiped out their olfactory sense.
Like COVID or something.
Right, not that. They didn't suffer a stroke. This is a profound psychological break. The author describes it as the exact moment their palate dies.
Okay, I want to pause and really dig into the mechanism of what's happening here. Because we all know the modern world is full of microplastics, forever chemicals, and heavily processed junk.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people feel anxious about what they eat. Is this author just highly health conscious to an extreme degree? Or is this a full-blown psychotic phobia of the physical world? Because they describe pushing this plate of stew away in quiet terror, realizing that their fundamental trust in the world had just shattered.
It is absolutely a phobia, but it's a phobia rooted in a hyper-awareness of the moral world, not just the physical one.
Yeah, well, unpack that for me.
We have to think about what eating actually is. Eating is, at its core, an act of supreme trust.
Trusting the food, you mean?
Right. Every single time you swallow a bite of food, you are making a subconscious wager. You are trusting that the external world is benign.
That it won't hurt you.
Yes. You are trusting that this substance will sustain you, integrate into your cells, and not poison you. When the author's palate dies, it's a symbolic death of their innocence. They realize that the world is not benign. It is fundamentally corrupt.
So they are tasting the corruption.
Precisely. The hypervigilance kicks in. When they look at the stew, they stop seeing meat and vegetables. They start seeing the unseen hands that prepared the food.
Oh, wow.
They visualize the resentful factory workers standing on a line for 14 hours. They see the greedy corporate marketers engineering the supply chain. They see the exploited migrant farmers who picked the vegetables.
So they're seeing the whole system.
Every grudge, every systemic cruelty, and every microaggression leaching into the ingredients like a spiritual toxin. Eating is no longer just biological sustenance. It becomes a violent moral transaction where you are internalizing the suffering of others.
That is heavy. The ash they taste is basically the burned up remains of their trust in humanity.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But it's also so extreme that this terror bleeds into how they view water. They introduce this concept they call the hydrophobic Eucharist.
Yes, this part is fascinating.
Right. Water, which across almost every culture and religion is the universal symbol of cleansing, purity, and life, becomes a source of absolute terror.
And we have to understand the cognitive dissonance required for this to happen. How does a person functionally survive a Tuesday if they view a glass of clear tap water as a spiritual threat?
Exactly. I'm stuck on this idea. I can completely understand being disgusted by a cheap hot dog or factory farm beef.
Sure.
That has a clear, documented moral and environmental weight. You can watch documentaries about it. But water, how does the brain literally misinterpret the most basic chemical requirement for survival as danger? I have trouble seeing this as anything other than severe clinical paranoia.
It is paranoia, but it's a logically consistent paranoia within their framework.
Okay, how so?
If the entire system is tainted, the most basic elements of that system are the most deeply infected. When they look at a glass of tap water, their brain's threat detection system misfires. They don't see H2O.
What do they see?
They imagine the unseen contaminants swirling in it, the lead from decaying municipal pipes, the microscopic plastics, the runoff of pharmaceutical drugs flushed down millions of toilets.
Oh, geez.
They literally call it the runoff of human despair.
Runoff of human despair. Wow.
In their mind, drinking the water is participating in a communal sickness. It's a communion, a Eucharist, but instead of connecting them to the divine, it connects them to the toxicity of modern civilization.
And think about how incredibly isolating that must be. You were terrified of the water in your own sink. And notice how the people around the author respond to this distress. They offer that casual, everyday advice that you and I probably give to our friends all the time.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Drink more water. Got a headache? Drink more water. Feeling anxious or depressed? Have you had a glass of water today? Are you hydrated?
It is the ultimate modern panacea. We throw hydration at absolutely everything.
Yes, and the author absolutely despises that phrase. They perceive drink more water, not as an act of care from a friend, but as a deeply dismissive insult.
Well, from their perspective, it minimizes this massive, complex existential despair into a simple chemical imbalance.
Right, like it can just be fixed with a few ounces of fluid. It feels like society is saying your profound spiritual pain, your awareness of the world's cruelty is invalid. It's just your own fault for not practicing basic biological self-care.
It is the ultimate gaslighting of the soul. Society is telling them that their moral horror is just a symptom of dehydration.
Exactly.
And this explains their sudden preference for bitterness over sweetness. The author notes that sweetness, sugar, honey, artificial sweeteners, begins to feel inherently manipulative.
Like a trick.
Yes, it feels like a siren song, a cheap trick trying to lure them into a false sense of contentment. They start seeking out extreme bitterness. Black oversteeped coffee, bitter raw greens.
Because bitterness feels honest.
Exactly. Bitterness doesn't lie to you about the pain of living. It matches their internal state. It confirms their suspicion that the world is harsh.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this aversion to the quick fix of a glass of water or the cheap comfort of sugar perfectly mirrors another massive critique the author launches into.
The medicalization of childhood trauma.
Yes, they draw a very direct parallel between drink more water and take this pill.
If we pull the lens back and look at the broader sociological argument, the author is deeply critical of what they call the welfare state mindset.
Right.
They reflect on their own history, being a child in a mental ward and later placed in a boarding school environment.
That's a tough childhood.
It really is. And whenever they exhibited emotional distress, rebellion, or deep sadness, it was immediately met with psychotropic drugs. They use this incredibly stark, haunting visual in the text.
The pills, right.
Yeah, they describe their own brain as being composed entirely of medication capsules. It's a symbol of how society, rather than fixing the environment, tries to chemically alter the child to tolerate the environment.
They actually point out a staggering statistic from their research in the document. Foster children are medicated with psychotropic drugs up to 13 times more often than children not in the system.
13 times. That's just wild.
And the author's fury here is palpable. Instead of addressing the root despair, the systemic abuse, the neglect, the profound instability of being separated from a family, the adults in the room just reached for a chemical restraint.
It's easier that way for the system, I mean.
Right. The author writes, you cannot trap an eating disorder in a pill. Or a trauma disorder, for that matter.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly potent argument against trying to treat a spiritual or social disease with a pharmaceutical band-aid. You are silencing the alarm bell instead of putting out the fire.
And this brings us back to the absolute destruction of trust. Think about the progression we've just tracked.
It's a dark path.
If you cannot trust the water in your glass because it's physically polluted, and you cannot trust the medication you're given because it's just a tool for social compliance,
You're completely isolated.
you are an island, utterly alienated. And if you cannot trust the basic elements of survival, it forces a terrifying question. Who or what is setting the table?
If the author can no longer trust the very water from the tap in the privacy of their own home, the isolation must be unbearable.
Ugh.
But what happens when that isolation is forced to sit at a crowded, supposedly loving family dinner table?
The paranoia has nowhere to hide.
Exactly. You are suddenly surrounded by the very people and systems you suspect are poisoning you. This leads directly into the author's scathing view of everyday social rituals, which they title The Rotten Banquet.
The rotten banquet.
The author views the modern family dinner not as a place of connection, but as a theater of total suffocating hypocrisy. There is this one specific anecdote about their uncle's Sunday turkey dinner that is it's chilling to read.
It serves as the perfect microcosm of their entire philosophy. The scene is set so beautifully, almost cinematically.
Yeah, it really paints a picture.
The dining room table is set with heirloom china. The crystal glasses are gleaming. The turkey in the center is perfectly roasted and golden brown. Everyone is dressed nicely.
Sounds like a normal holiday.
Right. The uncle stands up at the head of the table, raises his glass, and leads a pious, smiling toast to family values, integrity, and hard work. Everyone murmurs their agreement. But the author sits there, paralyzed, because they know the reality behind the curtain. They know that this same uncle runs a local slaughterhouse that has a long documented history of safety violations, horrific animal cruelty, and systematically underpaying vulnerable immigrant workers.
It's like being forced to be an actor in a play, and everyone in the cast is absolutely refusing to look backstage at the ropes and pulleys. Or in this case, the literal slaughterhouses and exploited workers, because acknowledging it would ruin the magic of the meal. The author sits there, watching the uncle's carving knife slice through the turkey meat, feeling completely nauseous.
The contrast is sickening. The uncle speaks of family values while serving the product of his own brutality.
And everyone else at the table just politely chews and compliments how tender the meat is.
The author actually leverages a very famous philosophical concept here. They apply Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil to everyday consumption.
That's a huge leap. For you listening who might not be familiar, Arndt coined that phrase while covering the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the major organizers of the Holocaust.
Right.
She observed that Eichmann wasn't some cartoon monster foaming at the mouth. He was just a startlingly ordinary, boring bureaucrat who was just following orders and doing his job without questioning the system.
Exactly. We are culturally conditioned to think of evil as this grand cinematic villainy. But Arendt argued that the most horrific evil usually happens when ordinary, well-meaning people just go about their daily routines, completely detached from the consequences of the systems they participate in.
And the author brings that to the dinner table.
The author argues, what is more routine, what is more banal than eating? They expand this beyond the uncle's dinner table to the corporate world. They describe a high-end corporate steakhouse dinner.
Oh, the CEO part.
Yes, the CEO toasts to the company's integrity and sustainability initiatives while cutting into a massive, bloody slab of factory-farmed beef.
Totally ignoring the reality.
Completely ignoring the environmental devastation, the methane emissions, the cruelty required to put that steak on his plate, and all the middle managers laugh on cue. Everyone plays the role of the satisfied, polite consumer. The evil isn't in a mustache-twirling villain. The evil is in the polite chewing.
I want to push back on the author a bit here, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because it's easy to point at a hypocritical slaughterhouse owner or a corporate CEO and call it a death cult. But what about the people trying to do it right?
You mean the wellness crowd?
Yeah. Isn't striving for wellness and clean eating a positive thing? A huge portion of the population sees the flaws in the industrial food system and actively tries to eat organic, to track their macros, to treat their bodies like temples.
Right.
How does the author twist taking care of your physical body into part of this death cult?
It's a great question, and the author actually anticipates it, because the author argues that modern diet culture and the wellness industry have not escaped the death cult. They have just rebranded it into a new religion.
A new religion.
The author coins the term metabolic nihilism. They argue that this obsession with wellness is not actually about health or vitality. It is entirely about control, purity, and moral superiority.
Okay, how so? Explain that.
Think about the language we use. We have replaced traditional religious morality, where you are judged by how you treat the poor or the sick, with what the author calls secularized Puritanism.
Secularized Puritanism.
We judge people by what is in their grocery cart. Calories are no longer just units of energy, they are counted like sins. Digestion is no longer a biological process, it is a moral trial.
Oh, wow. When you put it like that, I mean, think about the fasting apps on our phones.
Yes. Exactly. Compare a modern fasting app to a medieval monk's confession journal.
They're pretty similar.
You log your hours of deprivation, you receive digital badges for your purity, you confess when you break the fast. You use words like clean eating, which inherently implies that anyone who eats differently or can't afford to shop at Whole Foods is somehow dirty or morally inferior.
That's a really dark way to look at a salad.
The author even points out a specific real-world diet program that literally labels high-calorie treats as sins, spelled SYNS. The bathroom scale has literally become an altar where modern people strip naked and pray for salvation in the form of pounds lost.
The hypocrisy of it all is just staggering when you zoom out. And the author experiences this whiplash firsthand.
With the soup kitchen, right?
Yes. They talk about volunteering at an urban soup kitchen on Thanksgiving morning. They are ladling cheap, powdered gravy and serving processed rolls to people who haven't eaten a proper meal in days. Real grinding poverty.
Yeah.
And then a few hours later, the author goes home to a grotesque, overabundant Thanksgiving family feast. They sit there, staring at a table, groaning under the weight of 5 different side dishes, 3 desserts, more food than the entire table could eat in a week.
Just massive excess.
And they have to sit there holding hands, listening to these hollow prayers of gratitude from people who have no concept of true hunger.
It creates a psychic break. The author quotes the ancient Roman philosopher Seneca to make sense of it.
What does Seneca say?
Seneca, observing the decadence of the Roman elites, wrote, "They vomit so they may eat, and eat so that they may vomit." The author sees our modern culture functioning the exact same way. Our gluttony feeds on itself. We consume endlessly not just food, but content, products, experiences to try and fill a profound spiritual void. But because the food is empty of meaning, when the stomach is physically stuffed to the point of pain, the soul is still entirely empty.
So if the banquet is fundamentally rotten, if the food is tainted by cruelty, if the family dinner is masked in hypocrisy, and if the wellness alternatives are just secular Puritanism, what is the alternative?
That's a logical dead end.
Right. If you truly believe this, you can't participate. The only moral choice left is absolute refusal, starvation. And this is where the document takes a wild turn.
It really does.
Because this obsession with purity through starvation isn't a new concept. It actually has a deep, heavily documented historical precedent.
Yeah.
The author goes digging and takes us back to the Middle Ages to a phenomenon called anorexia mirabilis.
Anorexia mirabilis. It translates from Latin to miraculous lack of appetite.
Miraculous lack of appetite.
As the author is withdrawing from food, they start reading obsessively about medieval holy women and female mystics. The most prominent example is Saint Catherine of Siena.
Who was she? Give us some context.
Catherine lived in the 14th century in Italy. It's crucial to understand her environment. She lived during a time of immense, ostentatious wealth and deep corruption within the Catholic Church and the papal courts.
So a lot of hypocrisy.
Exactly. The leaders of the church were living like kings, hoarding wealth, feasting constantly, while the common people suffered through plague and poverty. Catherine's response to this systemic hypocrisy was a radical renunciation of all physical comfort.
She just gave it all up.
She viewed the body's hunger as a tether to a corrupt world, so she began to severely restrict her food. Toward the end of her short life, she refused all normal sustenance. She claimed she was sustained entirely by consuming nothing but the Eucharist, the communion wafer, once a day.
It is so wild to think about. A modern person living in a post-industrial world with a smartphone in their pocket, finding their deepest kinship with a 14th century Italian mystic.
It's bizarre, but the logic holds up for them.
You can see the logic. For the author, starvation becomes elevated from a psychological disorder to a sacred act. It becomes the ultimate revolt against consumerism. If society is a death cult of endless consumption, then aggressively refusing to consume is the ultimate act of rebellion.
Hunger becomes a prayer.
Exactly. The physical emptiness provides a shield against the world's toxicity.
But here is where the author shows incredible self-awareness, and it's a tragic realization. They struggle deeply with a core contradiction in their new belief system.
What's the contradiction?
An expert in medieval theology would draw a very stark contrast between anorexia mirabilis and anorexia nervosa, which is the modern clinical diagnosis. The author realizes the tragic paradox in their own behavior. Think about it.
Cool.
St. Catherine and the true mystics starved themselves out of an overwhelming ecstatic love for God and a deep compassion for a broken world. They wanted to empty themselves so they could be filled with divine grace.
Right. They did it for love.
But the author realizes they are starving for the exact opposite reason. They are not starving out of love. They are starving out of disgust, revulsion, and pure hatred for a corrupt world.
And a hatred for themselves for being biologically tied to that world. They share this incredibly visceral story from their research.
The salad story.
Yeah. While St. Catherine would eat only the Eucharist, there was another medieval saint who was offered a rare treat of a fresh, crisp salad. She felt the desire to eat it, but she was so terrified of experiencing earthly pleasure that she forced herself to eat the salad and then immediately went outside, shoved a rough wooden twig down her throat, and vomited it back out.
Just to forcefully reject the pleasure of the world.
The author reads this and feels that exact same revulsion. Any pleasure derived from the modern world, even the crunch of a fresh vegetable, feels like a trick. It feels like poison.
And that concept of poison is so central, and it extends far beyond just what is on the dinner plate. The author introduces one of the most intellectually compelling concepts in the document, the poisoned logos.
Let's define logos first, because it's a heavy word.
Right. Logos is an ancient Greek philosophical and theological term. Depending on whether you are reading Heraclitus, the Stoics, or the Gospel of John, it generally means the divine principle of reason that gives order to the universe.
Okay.
It is the word, the ultimate source of truth, meaning, and language.
So to say the logos is poisoned is to say that language itself, truth itself, has been corrupted.
Exactly. The author realizes that they can't even trust the words used to describe reality, the toxification of meaning.
This part of the text completely blew my mind. I want you listening to think about the last time you walked down the cereal aisle or the snack aisle at a grocery store.
Oh, all the buzzwords.
How many times did you see words screaming at you in bright green fonts? Natural, pure, guilt-free.
Everywhere.
The author walks down these aisles in a state of terror, realizing that these profound, almost sacred words have been entirely hollowed out and weaponized by corporate marketing.
Let's look closely at the mechanism of how this works, specifically with the phrase guilt-free brownie. The author dissects this perfectly.
Okay, let's unpack that.
When an advertisement sells you a guilt-free dessert, it is not actually freeing you from guilt. What it is secretly doing is reinforcing the underlying puritanical premise that eating a regular brownie should cause you deep moral guilt.
It creates the very anxiety it pretends to cure.
Yes, it infects you with a sense of sin regarding your own biology, and then, brilliantly, it sells you the manufactured absolution for a profit margin. The logos, the truth of what a brownie is poison to manipulate your behavior.
So if the words we use to describe our feelings, our health, and our food are literally being manufactured in focus groups by advertising agencies in New York, how do we even begin to think an original thought about our bodies?
It's hard to know what's real.
If the language in my head isn't mine, whose is it?
It's a paralyzing realization, and it culminates for the author during a complete breakdown in an eating disorder support group.
Oh, the folding chairs scene.
Yeah, they describe sitting in this circle of metal folding chairs, listening to the therapist and the other patients. Everyone is using modern therapy buzzwords: self-care, triggering, holding space, body positivity.
Which normally sounds helpful.
Normally, yes. But to the author, whose mind is attuned to this poison logos, these words feel completely commodified, slick, and fake. It sounds like HR speak. They feel physically unable to speak. They write that they are desperate for what they call bread words.
Bread words.
Simple, honest, unvarnished language that actually connects to raw human reality, rather than a polished corporate script designed to make everyone feel comfortable.
But this corruption of the physical world, and this corruption of language, it doesn't stop at the edge of the dinner table.
No, it bleeds into everything.
If you can't trust what enters your mouth,
Yeah.
and you can't trust the words coming out of it, what else is compromised? This is where the deep dive takes us into some of the author's darkest, most vulnerable confessions.
It gets really intense here.
They realize that this same corporate machinery has infected how they view human intimacy and desire. They introduce this concept called mirror appetites.
The author begins to view lust and gluttony not as separate moral failings, but as reflections of each other. They are mirror appetites. Both are fundamentally distorted hungers that, when indulged through the modern system, do not satisfy you, but rather devour you from the inside out. They write, "Gluttony is to food what lust is to sex."
They turn their analytical gaze onto pornography, describing it as a death cult of empty lust. And the parallels they draw are undeniable. They argue that pornography commodifies and processes human intimacy in the exact same way that the junk food industry commodifies and processes biological nourishment.
This is a very striking comparison.
Think about it. You sit alone in the dark, you consume something highly engineered, you get this massive, unnatural, quick hit of dopamine. But when the screen goes black, you are not nourished.
Right, you're just empty.
You are left with this profound spiritual hangover. You are left completely emaciated on a spiritual level while your brain's reward centers are hijacked.
What is truly fascinating here is how the author frames this. They call it the metabolic economics of desire.
Explain that. What are the economics there?
The author describes the pornography industry operating essentially like a high-frequency trading bot on Wall Street, but trading in human emotion.
Oh, wow.
Just like the processed food industry algorithms, your taste buds for the perfect crunch, the porn industry algorithms, your emotional margin, your baseline loneliness, your biological drive for connection.
It hacks the system.
It buys that vulnerability cheap, and it sells it back to you as a 3-second pixelated video clip. It operates on a ruthless model of supply and demand. You get the dopamine payout, but the spiritual tax bankrupts you. You are exchanging a piece of your soul for a fleeting thrill, and the industry is happy to metabolize your life force into their corporate revenue.
It's as if the author's soul is a leaky bucket. They are desperately thirsty for real connection, but they keep trying to fill the bucket with pixelated intimacy or junk food.
And it never works.
And when those synthetic inputs inevitably fail to hold water, they decide the only solution is to smash the bucket entirely. Because this endless consumption of pornography, combined with their profound isolation, leads to a terrifying psychological mutation.
Yeah.
They develop an intense, crippling fear of real physical women. They use the term gynophobia.
We have to view this through the traumatized, porn-warped lens of their isolation. Because they have consumed so much synthetic, one-sided intimacy where the other person is just pixels on a screen, the reality of a three-dimensional human being becomes terrifying. The feminine becomes an archetype of terror.
They literally describe women as the meal that eats back.
Yes, it is the terror of vulnerability. The author desires intimacy at a core human level, but they are terrified that if they actually open themselves up to a real woman, they will be swallowed whole.
Consumed.
They fear being judged, consumed by the needs of another person, and ultimately destroyed. Real intimacy requires mutual consumption, giving and receiving. The author is too fragile for that exchange.
So what is their response to this overwhelming fear and this chaotic, unwanted desire? This is where the story gets incredibly dark, and we have to talk about severe self-harm.
It's hard to read.
Because it's not just fasting anymore. Refusing food isn't enough to quell the chaos in the mind. It escalates to literal self-flagellation.
Yeah, the midnight ritual.
Describe this harrowing scene. The author waits until the house is completely quiet. They kneel on a bare, cold wooden floor. They take a thick, folded leather belt, and they repeatedly whip their own back until it is covered in raw red welts.
It's so visceral.
They are treating their own body like a disobedient dog being conditioned with negative reinforcement. The logic is brutal. If I experience an impure thought of lust, I will crack the whip. I will beat the desire out of the flesh.
It is a horrifying, desperate bid to regain control over a body that feels like it belongs to a corrupt world. The author is walking a razor-thin psychological tightrope here. Again, they look to history to justify the pain.
They do.
They recount stories of historical figures like St. Francis of Assisi, who famously struggled with intense lust and supposedly threw himself naked into a freezing, snow-covered briar patch to shock his system and quench his physical desires.
I have to stop and push back hard here, because reading this part of the document is deeply disturbing. Is this a genuine pursuit of holiness, or is this just pathology?
That's the big question.
Does the author actually believe this leather belt is curing their spiritual sickness? Or do they recognize they are just replacing one sickness, the death cult of consumption, with the sickness of self-mutilation?
The author is highly self-aware, and that makes it even more tragic. They are fully aware of the irony of their actions. They know they are systematically destroying their physical body in a desperate, perhaps delusional attempt to save their soul.
Do they know it's crazy?
They explicitly ask the question in the text, is this holiness or madness? They know the line between the two has completely blurred in those moments on the floor.
But they keep doing it.
Because their core argument is that they were driven to this extreme madness by a society that has weaponized absolutely everything against the human soul.
Yeah.
The food is a weapon, the water is a weapon, the language is a weapon, the sexuality is a trap.
Everything's a threat.
If every natural impulse has been corrupted by a system designed to exploit you, then attacking your own natural impulses feels like the only logical defense mechanism. Which brings us to the grand culmination of this societal critique.
The thanatophoric kitchen.
Yes, the author takes all of these fears, the food, the language, the exploitation, and synthesizes them into a concept they call the thanatophoric kitchen.
Thanatophoric, meaning death-bearing. The idea is that the kitchen of the modern world doesn't bear life. It is an engine that bears death.
Exactly.
And the author starts writing these incredibly dark, satirical, metaphorical recipes to explain how society functions. They call them recipes for collapse.
I love this part.
I want to actually read the ingredients of some of these because the metaphor is so sharp. One is called gluttony au gratin. The ingredients are 2 cups of rampant consumer appetite, a heavy cream of targeted social media advertising, baked until numb, and smothered in a thick crust of self-loathing.
It's brilliant, biting satire.
Another one is childhood stew sautéed in chemicals. You take the bright organic memories of youth, you boil them down in a broth of high-fructose corn syrup, and you adulterate them with artificial preservatives and red dye 40 until the original innocence is completely obscured and the child is hyperactive and addicted.
These recipes are a lament. They are a eulogy for how corporate machinery has ruthlessly targeted our most vulnerable populations.
The kids.
The author brings up that $1.8 billion figure, again, the amount the food and beverage industry spends every single year marketing directly to children. They employ food scientists to engineer snacks to hit specific, mathematically calculated bliss points of sugar, fat, and salt, designed to bypass the brain's natural satiety signals and create lifelong addictions.
They just hijack the biology.
They are literally turning the sacred act of a family meal into units of corporate profit, and they're turning toddlers into brand loyalists before they even know how to read the alphabet.
And observing all of this creates a paralyzing state of mind. that the author names doubt for dinner.
Doubt for dinner.
I want you to imagine sitting down to eat a meal, and you cannot trust a single variable on the table or in the room. You open your phone and read a scientific study that says drinking 3 cups of coffee a day extends your lifespan.
Right.
You scroll down, and the next day a new study says coffee causes heart palpitations and anxiety. You worry if the tap water has lead. You worry if the air you are breathing while you chew has micropollutants.
Exhausting.
The contradictory narratives, the constant barrage of health warnings cause a total psychic collapse. You can't even enjoy walking outside on a sunny day without a voice in your head wondering about UV radiation or the AQI index.
And this engineered doubt is not an accident. It isolates the individual. When you cannot trust the scientific community, when you know the corporations are lying to you, and when the cultural traditions of your grandparents have been mocked or forgotten, you freeze.
You just stop.
You are entirely alone. But what makes it truly, finally unbearable for the author is how human health and diet have been weaponized by both extremes of the political spectrum.
Right, the author feels completely trapped in this ideological crossfire. And just to be absolutely clear for you listening, we are not endorsing or condemning either of these political viewpoints. We're impartially examining how the author experiences these massive cultural forces pressing in on their psyche.
Exactly. We're just looking at their perspective.
On the left wing of the cultural spectrum, the author perceives a radical egalitarianism, where traditional foods, agricultural practices, and family recipes are constantly deconstructed or shunned as unenlightened. Eating becomes heavily tied to climate guilt and social justice.
So every bite has a moral weight.
The message they hear is if you eat a certain way, if you consume dairy or meat, you are personally complicit in destroying the planet and perpetuating inequality.
And simultaneously, on the right wing of the cultural spectrum, the author perceives a stern, almost militaristic puritanism where the physical body must be ruthlessly disciplined.
Like hustle culture for the body.
Right. Gluttony is viewed as a severe moral failing, a sign of weakness or degeneracy, and the flesh must be constantly policed and optimized for performance. The message they hear is if you are not optimizing your body, you are a failure to your family and your nation.
For the author, both sides of the aisle are standing right next to their ears, screaming at maximum volume, tearing at their psyche. If every single bite of food comes with a side of political guilt, corporate manipulation, or health anxiety, is it any wonder this author just decides to put the fork down and stop eating altogether?
It really makes sense when you stack it all up like that.
It's like being trapped in a tiny courtroom where the prosecution and the defense are both screaming their closing arguments at you simultaneously. The judge has left the building, and the only way to make the noise stop is to quietly get up and leave the room entirely.
Leaving the room is precisely the strategy. It is the only move left on the board. The ultimate tragedy of this thanatophoric kitchen, with all its noise and guilt, is that it completely erases all ancestral knowledge.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we lose the family recipe book passed down through generations. We lose the sacred, quiet ritual of breaking bread together with neighbors. And we replace it with the Uber Eats app, solitary consumption in front of a glowing screen, and ideological anxiety. So the author decides to withdraw completely from the physical world.
This brings us to the final act of this deep dive. It is a rapid descent into what the author calls divine emaciation.
Divine emaciation.
They view the process of starvation as a ladder leading up to the absolute. The less they eat, the less tethered they are to the death cult. They believe the inner fire of their hunger is slowly burning away the ideological toxins of society.
They enter a state of severe clinical dissociation. They refer to this state as alien flesh.
Alien flesh, that sounds terrifying.
The author describes waking up in their bedroom, but they don't feel like they are in their body. They feel their consciousness hovering near the ceiling, looking down at their frail, emaciated body lying on the bed as if it were an estranged roommate.
Wow. They completely detach.
They stop using the pronoun I when referring to their limbs. They start referring to their own body as an it. The estrangement from humanity is complete.
It leads to this incredibly haunting, chilling scene
Right.
that closes the primary narrative of the document. The Last Supper with the Void.
The imagery here is unbelievable.
The author describes sitting completely alone at dusk in an empty kitchen. The table is impeccably set with heavy silver cutlery and crystal, but there are no plates, there is no food, there is no water.
It's just emptiness.
They sit in the gathering darkness, they raise an invisible cup, and they toast to nothingness. The cycle is complete. They have consciously chosen absence over abundance, Because in their fractured mind, the void is the only honest thing left in the universe.
Because it's empty.
It doesn't pretend to nourish you, it doesn't lie to you, it doesn't try to sell you a guilt-free brownie. It just is.
But the tragedy, the immense, heartbreaking irony of the author's entire journey is profound. In their desperate, flailing attempt to become pure spirit and escape a corrupt transactional world, they became entirely disconnected from the very things that make life worth living: humanity, community, and love.
They lost it all.
The hatred they felt for the world's corruption turned inward and ate them alive. They wanted to starve out the darkness of the modern age, but they ended up starving out the light as well.
It really is heartbreaking. They wanted to be, in their own words, no longer human to escape the immense pain of living in this system.
Yeah.
But right at the absolute precipice, as the body begins to shut down, the text shifts.
Yeah, the tone completely changes.
The militant, angry ideology suddenly drops away. In the final paragraphs, hovering at the edge of life, the author feels a sudden, weary spark of profound gratitude.
Not for ideologies, though.
Not for ideologies, not for purity, but for small childhood memories. The smell of their mother's cooking before the palate died. The simple feeling of cool rain falling on their skin.
It's a moment of devastating humanity. Stripped of all the philosophical armor, they are just a human being who was desperately hungry for love and purpose in a world that offered them processed substitutes.
It's just a person wanting connection.
The author is left with a final ambiguous question as the text closes. Does the tongue that tastes only hatred and ashes finally reach the divine? Or does it merely reach silence? Has this entire ordeal created a path to God, or has he just created a lonely death cult of one?
The text ends right there before we get an answer. It just fades to black.
It leaves the reader carrying the entire weight of the question.
Wow. Okay. I want to take a deep breath here. Thank you for sticking with us through this. I know this was a heavy, challenging, and profoundly dark exploration of the human condition.
It really was.
But the reason we dive into texts like this is because the author's extreme journey acts as a magnifying glass. It forces us to look at our own mundane, everyday realities with fresh eyes.
Definitely.
The author starved himself because he felt every single input from the modern world was tainted, manipulative, and poisonous. But I want to turn this back to you, listening right now. Think about your own daily routines today. Think about your own pantry, your own screen time, the apps on your phone.
The things you consume every day.
Exactly. How much of what you consume, whether it's the food on your dinner plate, the media you scroll through at midnight, or the buzzwords you use to describe your own feelings, is actually truly nourishing you? And how much of it is just feeding a massive algorithmic cycle you didn't even choose to be a part of?
That's the real question.
If you had to clear everything away and set a table with only the things that are uncorrupted, only the things that are truly yours, what would actually be on your plate? Or, to go back to where we started this whole conversation, if your favorite song suddenly sounded like screeching metal, would you keep forcing yourself to listen just because everyone else is? Or would you finally seek out a new kind of silence?